Please don't think of this as creepy, but when I was a boy in the 60s, I used to sneak around our neighborhood and onto our neighbors' properties looking through their windows and pretending to be a spy or a secret agent. It was totally innocent, and I would use a pair of my dad's old binoculars along with a small notebook that I'd write fake notes in like I was reporting information. I would even wear clothing that I thought blended in with the vegetation. It was all make-believe, and I knew that. I just genuinely liked it, and not in a weird way. Funny enough, it turned out to be pretty good training because I was a licensed private investigator from 1983 until 2018. During those younger years, we had a neighbor 2 houses away that was an older bachelor we all knew as Mr. Wallace. His full name was Wilbur Wallace, which I always thought had a nice ring to it, but we never called him by his first name. I could only assume that he was retired because he never went to work and spent a huge amount of time taking care of his yard and garden. He was extremely friendly and loved all of us neighborhood kids. He would even make us little toys and knickknacks in his garage, which had been set up for woodworking. Everyone trusted him, and nobody had a bad word to say about the guy. One night I was doing my thing and snuck over to his house pretending it was a surveillance mission while using my binoculars to look through one of his small basement windows. He had a finished basement with separate rooms and furniture, and I saw him walk in and out of the room I was looking at like he was searching for something. He would come in and look around, then leave the room and come back a minute or 2 later to do it all over again. I couldn't figure out what he was doing, and it made it that much more interesting for me. I remember getting down on my stomach and elbows under one of his bushes near the street and staring through my binoculars. I hadn't even gotten them focused before he walked into the room again, and then another person walked in right behind him. I have a crystal clear memory of this because he never had people over, and I thought it must have been someone important. When I adjusted the focus to get the image sharp, I saw that the light inside the room was turned off, but the lights in the hallway outside the room were on. That lighting turned Mr. Wallace and the other person into perfect black silhouettes. I moved my focus over to the second person because I wanted to take notes on him, and that's when my little brain shut down for a moment. I didn't know it at the time, but the shape of the second silhouette was identical to what people would later call a gray alien. I saw a very thin upper body with long arms and a disproportionately large head. This was not a strange-looking person or someone wearing a costume. It was a real, moving and breathing being, and seeing it made me physically jerk backwards because I had never seen anything like it. What happened next is still the scariest thing I've ever experienced, and it's etched into my memory. Whatever creature was standing down there with Mr. Wallace turned its head toward the window and looked perfectly in my direction. Then right after that, Mr. Wallace looked too, and I swore they could both see me. Mr. Wallace jumped to the window and pulled the shade down as fast as he could, and when he did that, I panicked and sprinted home. I ran upstairs, locked myself in my room, and cried. I wasn't thinking about aliens or secret missions or anything else. I was terrified because I thought I'd been caught spying, and I knew I was going to be in a huge amount of trouble. Days went by after this, and then weeks, and nothing happened. Mr. Wallace never came over and told my parents like I had been sure he was going to do, and I never even saw him come out of his house during that time. Eventually, I convinced myself that they hadn't actually seen me and instead noticed that the shade was up and closed it. I still kept my head down when I'd walk past his house on my way to and from school, but I really thought I had gotten away with it. Then one day on my way home, he was outside and standing at his fence along the sidewalk and stopped me. He didn't say hello like he normally would. He just calmly asked what I had been doing in his bushes. He didn't say it in an angry or threatening way, but his face looked emotional and almost sad, like something was wrong. I didn't know what to say to him, and I felt horribly guilty and nervous, but I did what my dad always said to do and told the truth. I admitted that I had seen him talking to someone in his basement. When I said that, his head went down and the look on his face got even worse, like I had just given him some terrible news. I felt so bad about what I'd done, I had tears welling up in my eyes, and I'm sure he noticed because he told me I wasn't in trouble and that it wasn't my fault. He said that the shade should have been down and that I wasn't supposed to see what I saw. I remember him putting his hand on the top of my head and telling me everything was okay, but then he said he was going to have to leave. I didn't understand what that meant at the time, and all that came out of me was, "I'm sorry, Mr. Wallace." After that, I walked home feeling sick in my stomach. I had never gotten in trouble or caught like that before, and I hated it. Then, within a month, he actually moved out and his house sat vacant. I felt responsible for him leaving for a long time, even though he had told me it was okay. No one new moved into his house for a while after that either. His yard became overgrown and the place looked abandoned for a year or more. Other neighborhood kids started calling it the ghost house because it was always dark and it looked scary at night. Eventually, someone did move in. Then later, we moved out of that neighborhood when I was in high school and time just kept going. It took me decades to realize what had actually happened, and somewhere in between the late 80s and the early 90s, I started to see depictions of the aliens we all know today. It clicked immediately when I first saw them, and it brought me right back to my experience. I had never forgotten a single detail about what I'd seen through Mr. Wallace's basement window, and it was identical to the alien depictions. As a private investigator, I had to do some digging, and when I did, it got even more interesting. I couldn't find any record of a Wilbur Wallace living in that house, or even in that county. I also discovered that the house he lived in had been owned by a corporation during those years, which I didn't even know was possible on a residential property. Every direction I tried to go with him or the house led to a dead end. I now believe that Wilbur Wallace was a cover and not his real name, so the chances of finding him are most likely zero. I also believe that this was on purpose, and his real identity along with the reasons he might have been in our neighborhood are long gone and buried, and unfortunately that only leaves me with what I saw through his basement window. My experience happened in 1994 when I was a freshman in high school. At the time, my family lived on a lake in a mostly rural part of southeastern Michigan. We weren't surrounded by farms or anything, but all of the houses around the lake were spread out and had space. That year, and just a couple of weeks before school got out for the summer, there was a night where I was home alone while my parents were with my two younger siblings at a school party about a half hour away. Our house was kind of an L shape, and our kitchen had a big bay window that faced the backyard. Then, just past the backyard was the lake. Our living room also had a large window in it, but that view was partially blocked by trees. One of the things I remember most about that house was the vintage yellow phone we had mounted to the wall between the kitchen and the living room. It had what felt like 20 feet of cord, so you could walk around anywhere in the kitchen without having to get off the phone. After eating something that my mom left me, I was on that phone and pacing around the kitchen tethered by the long cord. I had been talking to my friend Stephanie, who lived about a mile away by road, but directly across the lake from us. I could see her house on the other side from our backyard. While I was talking to her, I randomly looked out the bay window toward the lake and saw something orange in the middle of the water. Our blinds had been angled open, but I lifted them all the way up and out of the way so I could see what it was. This is still the strangest looking thing I've ever seen, but what was out there looked like a miniature sun hovering over the water. It wasn't that big, but I could see the surface of it moving around and pulsing, which made the brightness change like a fire. The minute I saw it, I told Stephanie to look from her house. It was a lot closer to our side of the lake, but she had no problem seeing it, especially since it was dark. I think the only thing she said was that it could be a boat, but that wasn't right. I was closer and I could see the water lit up underneath it. There wasn't a boat anywhere near it. Since I hadn't seen it come from anywhere, I don't know how long it had been there, but I feel like I would have noticed if it came from the shore. I had been on the phone and walking past that window for a long time, so it just seemed to appear there out of nowhere. We had only been watching this for a very short amount of time when it started doing something. From my perspective, it looked like it was vibrating, but Stephanie said from her view it looked like it was spinning. I don't know who was right, but whatever it was doing caused this steam cloud or fog to form around it. I could even see the steam coming up from the lake like the water was being heated. This all happened really quickly, and in a matter of a few seconds, it just looked like a small orange cloud with no detail. My friend also saw this whole thing happen. I finally had to set the phone down and told Stephanie I was going outside to look at it, and this is something I regret doing. When I got out to the backyard, I walked straight to the edge of the lake where we had a short fence for the dog. There was something in the air that felt different, and it's hard to describe. There was like a charge building or something, and I could feel it in my body and on my skin. It made the little hairs on my arms tingle. Then I heard a pop sound like a shock, and it startled me so badly I ran back inside. When I got in the house, I picked the phone up off the counter and told Stephanie exactly what had just happened. I think we were both getting a little scared because she said she was going to walk next door to get her dad, who had been at the neighbor's house. Before we could even hang up the phone, the light got brighter and started pulsing hard. This time there was a popping sound happening with each pulse. It wasn't that loud, but it was sharp like an electrical shock. Also, every time it pulsed like that, our phone would get crackly with loud static like it was interfering with the line. We would lose each other's voices for a few seconds each time. I wasn't counting, but it had to have done this 5 or 6 times in a row. What's crazy is I could physically feel it in the house those times too. It was that same static charge feeling like when I'd been outside. Then the light went out. There was no last pulse or pop. It just stopped and went dark. This was a weird thought, but I remember wondering if the little sun had burned itself out, even though that made no sense. My friend and I were confused and still mildly scared, but not really in a bad way. We were kind of giggling about it because the whole thing had been so unexpected. I stayed on the phone with her for a while longer, but eventually got off when my parents got home. I let my mom and dad know what happened, but they had no idea what it could have been. My dad said something about ball lightning, and I had never heard of that, but I don't remember it being a very big deal, and nothing else really happened afterward. It was just something I saw. There is a second part to this though, but that didn't come until a few weeks later. It could be completely unrelated to what happened. I just find the timing of it to be unbelievable. A few weeks after I saw the mini sun over the lake, I started feeling very off in ways I couldn't explain. I felt exhausted and dehydrated. I would randomly get blurry vision while I was at school, and I just had this overall weakness which wasn't like me. Also, and I hadn't noticed this myself, but my mom did, within those few weeks I had lost over 10 pounds, and she said I looked concerningly thin in the face. Then one morning before school, I felt so bad that my mom took me into the ER, and that trip to the hospital turned into a life-changing week. At only 14 years old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and my blood sugar had been over 800. Back then, diabetes in teenagers was extremely uncommon. I had never even heard of it before the doctor said it, and I didn't know anyone else who had it. My entire life changed overnight. Long story short, this is something I obviously still deal with today, but it's much more manageable thanks to insulin pumps and CGMs and the technology we have now. But I've never stopped thinking about the timing of it. For those who don't know, type 1 is an autoimmune disease, and my diagnosis came just weeks after I had seen and been very close to that thing over the lake. I know that this is likely pure coincidence and I have no proof of anything, but I can't stop wondering if it had something to do with it. When those popping sounds were happening at my house, I could feel it through my entire body like electricity, and part of me thinks it triggered something. I was a perfectly healthy kid before that, and there's no diabetes anywhere else in my family. Maybe this is just all the years I couldn't eat the things my friends could or do all the things that they could, and I'm just looking for something to blame it on. I don't know. Either way, it still wouldn't explain what Stephanie and I saw over the lake. When I was growing up, we lived way out in the country on a large piece of property surrounded by woods in Washington State. We were really close to Beacon Rock State Park on the Columbia River. This was in the late 70s and early 80s, and my parents gave my brother and me an amount of freedom that I don't think many kids get anymore. We could roam around anywhere we wanted to go, camp in the woods, shoot our .22s, and pretty much disappear for hours at a time without anyone worrying. It was definitely a figure-it-out-on-your-own type of childhood, and at the time it was completely acceptable. One Friday evening when I was 14, we had just wrapped up a big barbecue with extended family. Most of our relatives had already left, and I was sitting alone on the front porch looking out across our pasture toward the trees at the end of our driveway. While I was out there, I thought I was seeing the full moon coming up through the trees, but this particular circle of light looked a little bigger than the moon would have been, and as I kept staring, I could see that it was actually moving very slowly from the left to the right. I had to watch it closely to make sure it was actually moving, and there's no doubt it was. I couldn't understand how something that size could be drifting across the sky. When it got to a clear opening in the trees, I knew for sure it wasn't something normal, so I ran inside to grab my older brother, who was in the middle of cleaning and ignored me. I ended up physically pulling him out to the porch while yelling at him, but when we got outside, it must have gone behind the trees because it wasn't there. I got punched in the arm for doing this, and he thought it was a joke, even though I swore to him it wasn't. Before it got dark that night, I had decided to camp in the woods behind our house, and this was something I did all the time, especially when the weather was nice. I never actually stayed out all night when I camped. I would just walk a few hundred yards into the trees, set up a tent, hang out by a small fire for a couple of hours, then head back to the house. I would also leave my tent there until the next morning when it was light and I could pack it up. That night, I had my hound and our Australian Shepherd with me, along with a bag of snacks and my .22. I set up the tent in a small clearing next to the creek that ran through our property, which was a regular spot for me. When I was getting the fire going, it had just started getting dark, but there was still enough light to see. I was down on my hands and knees adding sticks to the fire when both of the dogs started acting out. My hound was baying loudly, and it was a little unnerving because that was a sound he only made when we were hunting. I turned around and saw someone walking toward me from the direction of our house, the same way my brother or my dad would come down. I assumed it was one of them, so I went back to the fire. Then when I turned around again, whoever this was didn't look solid. I don't really know how to explain this, but the outline of their body had a waviness to it like a mirage. Since the creek was down lower and the walk out was slightly uphill, they were coming down the hill toward me and a light started to come up behind them. This light got larger and brighter like it was following this person, and I realized it had to be the same moon-like shape I had seen going across the sky from my porch. Both of the dogs were losing their minds while watching this happen and barking non-stop. I don't remember feeling scared right away because I still thought it had to be my dad or my brother. I was mostly confused by what was behind them, but then that changed. As this figure kept walking toward me, its whole body seemed to stretch vertically and elongate. It got taller and thinner as it came down the hill, and I saw its arms and legs change mid-stride. It was dark in the trees, but the bright backlight made it easier to see what was happening. It looked like it was actually morphing into something else. I never got to see who or what this was because it never made it to me. I felt like I blinked my eyes, and in that short amount of time, I was back in the house lying on my bed in my bedroom, and it was morning. My hound was at my feet like always, and I could hear my family in the kitchen. I had no sense of time passing between being in the woods and waking up in my bed, and it was very confusing. It felt exactly like waking up from a dream where you instantly leave one reality and wake up in another. When I opened my bedroom door, I could see into the kitchen. My parents and my brother were prepping a bunch of food with mixing bowls and dishes all over the counters, and everyone was acting normally. I called my brother into my room and told him that I had either had the most vivid dream ever or something was wrong with me. He didn't seem to care much and told me I needed to get up to help get ready for the barbecue. This made no sense to me because we had just had the barbecue and our whole family had already left. I had to sit back down on my bed because I thought I was going crazy, and my brother must have seen it in my face because he actually listened for a second and told me we had not had the barbecue and none of the family had even shown up yet. He calmly said it was a dream, and as hard as that was for me to swallow, I listened to him. I not only had to accept that the barbecue hadn't happened, but I also had to accept the fact it was still Friday, or Friday again to me. That day kept going and our family showed up little by little, but what bothered me was how familiar it all felt. Our relatives seemed to show up in the same order. My younger cousin was out in the yard hitting a volleyball. My uncle even had on a specific hat. I had dreamt about all of these things. It wasn't exactly the same, but most of it felt identical, like I was living through it a second time with only minor differences. That night, I sat on the porch again, expecting to see the same light that I thought was the moon in my dream, but I didn't see anything. It ended up being a totally normal night. The only thing that happened was I had a hard time sleeping because I was worried about it happening again. The next day finally came, which was actually Saturday, thank God, and I remember being happy I wasn't stuck in some loop. By the end of the day, I had pretty much written it off as an intense and realistic dream, and it was mostly out of my head until the following weekend. This was again on a Friday evening, and I was out wandering around and throwing a small football toy for my dog. I got to the tree line that went into the woods toward the creek, and when I walked in just 50 feet, I saw something that just about made my knees give out. My tent was sitting next to the creek and set up exactly where it had been in my dream. I ran over to it and saw that my coat, my snacks, and my .22 were inside. I knew I had not done this other than in my dream, and no one else would ever bring my stuff down there and set it up like that. Something had to have happened to me, even though I couldn't explain what it was, and it terrified me. I don't think I had the maturity or the critical thinking to understand how weird this really was. As I got older, though, I never forgot about it and wanted to figure out what happened to me. I still don't know if what I saw in the sky or the figure walking toward me by the creek were real. I also don't know what it would mean if they were. I do know that I lived the same day twice in a row, and that couldn't have been a dream. There were too many details that stayed the same, and unless I'm some kind of psychic, that's not possible. I'm at a total loss when I try to understand what this was or how it happened, and I've never even heard of anything like it happening to anyone else. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies.